BioSTL, for 2 decades, has been building the innovation economy of St. Louis, built on our world-class strengths in healthcare and medicine and plant science and agriculture. I'm Donn Rubin. I'm the president and CEO of BioSTL. So BioSTL really was established almost a quarter of a century ago, 24 years ago. It was the result, in part, of a plan that was done in the year 1999 and 2000. And we were created January of 2001 to implement that blueprint that was done a quarter of a century ago. And we've looked back at that plan and said, you know, we've checked all those boxes. We've way outstripped most of those recommendations. In fact, I look back and I realize how much more sophisticated we've become in understanding what it takes to build an innovation economy. We now are engaged, for the first time in a quarter of a century, our second comprehensive regional strategic plan for the bioeconomy in St. Louis. And we brought in a group of consultants, national consultants, they're called. BioSTL is the steward of a regional plan that we want the entire region, public sector and private sector, to embrace and to own. It's the St. Louis Bioeconomy Strategic Plan, engaging our corporate partners, our university partners, our workforce development partners, our funders, our public and private sector partners. And I really think about this as sitting where we are now, 25 years later. We know the world has changed, St. Louis has changed. We've become a lot more sophisticated in understanding and how we developed an ecosystem. Sitting here now, how do we triangulate the strengths of St. Louis as they are today and where they're heading with trends nationally and globally in the biosciences, with also what are the really big problems that need to be solved, and that St. Louis could play a major role, an indispensable role in solving those problems. We've come a long way. What we've seen is that job growth in the biosciences in St. Louis over that period of time is over 53% job growth in St. Louis, while the rest of the economy in St. Louis has been stagnant. We bring together our strengths, the trends, the problems. What are those areas and how do we invest in those areas over the next decade and beyond to elevate St. Louis as a major global player in the biosciences across human health and biomedicine, as well as agriculture and food. St. Louis's great strengths, our world-class strengths, how do we and where do we make those investments? What should our aspirations be? What do we want to be a decade from now? What lists do we want St. Louis to be on? What lists do we want St. Louis to be at the head of? Do we want to be number one between the coasts in something? Do we want to be in the top 5 in the country in something? How do we define those aspirations as a guiding blueprint for what we do next? We don't want to predefine what areas come out of this process, but going into it, we know there will be something in agtech, right? So we have all of the experts in the corporate world, the research world, the investor world, helping us look at what our strengths are, what are the trends, where should St. Louis be investing to make sure that we stay at the leading edge of agriculture technology, of plant science. We know there'll be areas in biomedicine, like neuroscience, where we already are a world leader. In the general area of omics, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, St. Louis, going back 25 years where we led the mapping of the human genome, St. Louis remains a leader in these growing and these nuanced areas. How do we invest in that to make sure St. Louis remains a leader or the leader in those areas? We know that we have to be very smart about how we allocate resources and how we tell our story and where the emphasis is in St. Louis's story for the next decade and the next quarter of a century. And that's what this process is about. We haven't done this for a quarter of a century. We've come a long way in the last 25 years, but we have a long way to go, a long way in terms of potential growth, and we're really excited about the next quarter of a century.